Welcome to our channel. We're so glad you're here to join us on this journey of captivating stories. If you're enjoying the experience, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. We're excited to see how far our stories reach. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the next special tale coming your way tomorrow. Get ready for more incredible moments and unforgettable adventures. Let's dive into today's story. How a simple apology changed everything. You won't believe what happened next. Sophie Miller stood behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron as she surveyed the busy diner. The sun had barely risen, but the morning rush was already in full swing. The small roadside diner, tucked away in a quiet town, was packed with locals and travelers stopping for breakfast. Sophie wasn't surprised. It was always this way. The morning crowd had its own rhythm, and she had learned to keep up with it over the years. She moved quickly between tables, refilling coffee cups and taking orders with a smile that never faltered, even on the toughest days. Her mind was never far from her family, though. Sophie was 29, and life had never been easy, especially now that her husband, Captain Jake Miller, was deployed overseas. She had learned to handle everything on her own, managing the diner and taking care of their 7-year-old daughter, Lily. There were days when the weight of it all seemed too much to bear, but Sophie never complained. It was just the way life was now. She had learned to keep going, no matter the challenges. As Sophie walked to a new table, the familiar clink of dishes and hum of conversations filled the air. She felt a sense of calm amidst the chaos. This was her life now, a life of constant motion, constant responsibility. Sophie had grown used to the long hours, the never-ending cycle of work and home. But today she felt a little more tired than usual. Maybe it was the weight of everything building up, working, caring for Lily, and missing Jake more than she had in a while. She was just about to take an order when the door to the diner swung open, and a man in a sharp, expensive suit stepped inside. Sophie turned toward him with a friendly smile, ready to take his order. But something in the way he looked at her made her heart sink. He wasn't here for a pleasant breakfast. She could tell immediately. "Good morning, sir. What can I get for you today?" Sophie greeted him as she approached the counter. The man didn't return her smile. Instead, he frowned and tapped his fingers impatiently against the counter. Sophie stood there, trying to maintain her composure as the seconds stretched into uncomfortable silence. "I've been waiting here for 10 minutes, he snapped. "Do you even know what customer service is?" Sophie's smile faltered slightly, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I'm really sorry, sir," she said. "We're a bit short-staffed today, but I'll take your order right away." The man scoffed loudly, his voice dripping with disdain. Unbelievable. If you can't do your job properly, why even bother? His words stung, and Sophie swallowed hard, fighting the urge to respond. She had dealt with rude customers before, but something about this man's attitude felt different. He wasn't just upset. He seemed to think he was entitled to treat people however he pleased. Sophie gripped the edge of the counter, trying to keep her composure. She had always believed in being kind, no matter how people treated her. But today, the words cut deeper than usual. She reminded herself to stay calm and collected. After all, it wasn't just her job on the line, it was her family's future. "I'll get your coffee right now, sir," Sophie said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. She turned to walk away, but the man wasn't finished. He muttered something under his breath about poor service and incompetence, loud enough for Sophie to hear. She clenched her jaw, pushing the frustration down. Sophie had always taken pride in her work, and it hurt to have someone dismiss her so carelessly. But this wasn't the first time she had faced this kind of disrespect. It wasn't the first time someone had made her feel small and insignificant. But that didn't make it any easier to handle. As Sophie poured the coffee and tried to focus on the task at hand, she reminded herself why she did this. It wasn't for the rude customers or the long hours. It was for Lily, for Jake, for the life she had worked so hard to build. And no matter what, she couldn't let people like him take that away from her. Sophie tried to shake off the sting of the businessman's words as she returned to the counter. She could feel his eyes on her as she moved around the diner, but she didn't dare look back. The air in the room felt heavier now, and every sound, the clinking of dishes, the hum of the coffee machine, seemed louder than before. It wasn't just the rush of customers that made her feel unsettled now. It was the weight of his judgment, of the way he looked down at her, like she was nothing more than a servant in his world. She forced herself to focus on her work. The coffee pot in her hand felt unusually heavy as she refilled the cups, her fingers stiff with tension. But no matter how hard she tried to ignore him, the businessman's words echoed in her mind. Incompetent. Unbelievable. The insults had a way of digging deep, leaving marks that couldn't easily be erased. Sophie wasn't new to rude customers. She had dealt with plenty over the years, each one a test of patience, each one wearing her down a little more. But today felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion from juggling work and home life, or maybe it was the pain of missing Jake. Whatever it was, the businessman's attitude seemed to hit harder than usual. As she made her way back to his table, she felt her hands begin to tremble. She gripped the coffee pot tightly, willing herself to keep it steady. The man was still tapping his fingers on the counter. His eyes narrowed in irritation. "I've been waiting for my coffee," he said, his voice rising. "Do I really have to wait this long for something as simple as that?" Sophie's heart was pounding now. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, the anger that she had been holding back for so long starting to bubble to the surface. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep calm. "I'm sorry, sir," she said again, her voice tight. "It's just a little busy today, but I'll get your coffee right away." The businessman sneered, clearly unimpressed. "This is why places like this never succeed," he muttered. "No professionalism, no respect for customers." Sophie's fingers tightened around the coffee pot. She wanted to say something, anything to shut him down, to remind him that she wasn't just some faceless waitress in a diner. She was a mother, a wife, a woman who worked every day to keep her family afloat. But the words wouldn't come. And then, just as Sophie was about to turn away, she heard a voice, unexpected, calm but full of authority, cut through the tension in the room. "Is there a problem here?" Sophie froze. She knew that voice. It was the last voice she ever expected to hear today. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned around. Standing in the doorway of the diner, in full military uniform, was none other than Jake, her husband. She had expected him to be gone for months, still stationed overseas. But there he was, standing tall, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room, with a quiet intensity. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. The diner seemed to fall silent as Jake's gaze landed on her, and she could feel the overwhelming relief and joy rush through her. Her hands trembled, but not from fear this time. No, it was the sudden surge of emotion. The surprise, the relief, the love that she had kept buried inside for so long. Jake's eyes softened as he locked onto her, his face breaking into a small smile. But then, as his gaze shifted to the businessman, that smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet authority. Jake didn't move from his spot in the doorway. He didn't have to. His presence filled the room and everyone could sense the change in the air. The businessman looked up, clearly taken aback by Jake's sudden arrival. He scoffed, clearly unimpressed by the military uniform. "Oh great, another soldier," he muttered, rolling his eyes. "What is this, a joke?" Jake didn't flinch. He simply took a step forward, his voice low but firm. "What's going on here?" he asked again, his eyes never leaving the businessman's face. The tension in the room was palpable. Sophie stood frozen, watching as the man who had belittled her now faced someone much bigger, much stronger. And for the first time that day, she felt like she might finally get the respect she deserved. Sophie's heart raced in her chest as she watched the standoff between Jake and the businessman. The diner was frozen in a tense silence, all eyes on the two men. She could feel the energy shift in the room, the weight of the situation heavy in the air. She had never expected Jake to come home early, let alone walk into this kind of chaos. Jake's uniform seemed to amplify his presence, his shoulders squared, his posture commanding. He wasn't just any soldier, he was a decorated officer, the kind of man who had earned respect, not demanded it. And yet, here was this businessman, still, scoffing as if Jake's authority didn't matter. Sophie held her breath as Jake took another step closer, his gaze locked on the businessman, unwavering. "Excuse me, sir." Jake's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a tone that made the entire diner hold its breath. "It seems like there's a misunderstanding here." The businessman, still holding on to his arrogance, sneered. "Misunderstanding? I'm just saying that the service here is absolutely terrible. I don't care who you are." He glanced briefly at Jake's uniform, then dismissed him with a wave of his hand. "I'm sure you've got better things to do than deal with me." Jake didn't blink. He wasn't intimidated, and the businessman could sense that now. Sophie could feel her pulse pounding in her ears as she watched the exchange. For a moment, she saw the man in front of her as just another customer who had no respect for her. But now, with Jake here, it was like everything changed. Sophie had always known Jake was strong, mentally and physically, but seeing him stand there, effortlessly commanding the room, filled her with a sense of pride she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Jake took another step forward, his eyes narrowing. "Let me make something clear," he said, his voice firm but not raised. "You think you've been treated badly here? My wife—" He paused for a moment and Sophie's heart stopped. She hadn't realized until now how much it meant to hear him call her his wife with such authority. "My wife has been working every single day while I've been overseas, raising our daughter alone, and still managing to handle rude customers like you. And you think it's okay to treat her like she's beneath you?" The businessman's smirk faltered. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, he looked over at the other customers who were all staring, waiting for his next move. Sophie could see the unease creeping into his expression. The arrogance he'd walked in with was now slipping away, piece by piece. His jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. "You really don't get it, do you?" Jake's voice softened, but the intensity behind his words was clear. "While you're sitting here complaining about your coffee, my wife is dealing with everything on her own. And you think it's okay to belittle her for doing her job?" The man shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze darting around the diner. Sophie could see his pride slipping away, replaced by something else, uncertainty, maybe even guilt. It was as if he was beginning to realize just how far he had crossed the line. Sophie held her breath as Jake stood there, unwavering, the entire diner watching in silence. The tension felt like it would snap at any moment. "Now, I'm going to give you one chance," Jake said, his voice cold. "Apologize to my wife right now." For a moment, the businessman just stared, his face flushed with embarrassment. The silence in the diner stretched on, thick with anticipation. Sophie could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of everything hanging in the balance. Would he apologize? Would he admit his mistake? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the businessman cleared his throat. I didn't mean it," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. He avoided looking at Sophie as he spoke, his words almost forced. "I'm sorry." Jake's eyes never left him. "Not to me," he said, his voice sharp. "To her." The businessman's face turned red, but Sophie could see the defeat in his eyes now. He turned toward her, still unable to meet her gaze. "I'm sorry," he repeated, more quietly this time. Sophie felt a mix of emotions rush through her: relief, satisfaction, and a surprising sense of strength. She had expected this apology to feel hollow, but hearing it from him, after everything that had happened, was more powerful than she had anticipated. She nodded at him, her voice steady. "Thank you. I hope you have a better day, sir." Without another word, the businessman grabbed his things and hurried out of the diner. As the door slammed shut behind him, the entire diner erupted into applause. Sophie's chest tightened as the noise swelled around her. She had never expected such a moment, never expected to feel so validated. Jake smiled at her, walking over and pulling her into his arms. "You okay?" he whispered, his voice warm and comforting. Sophie nodded, unable to find the words. She buried her face in his chest, feeling his familiar embrace as the tension of the last few minutes slowly melted away. Joe, from his usual booth, raised his coffee cup with a grin. "Welcome home, Sergeant." Jake gave a small nod, his eyes soft. "Good to be back," he said, his voice full of warmth as he held Sophie close. The moment was far from over, but for Sophie, it was a moment of triumph. And in that small diner, under the buzz of the morning rush, Sophie felt more powerful than she ever had before. The businessman's hurried exit left an almost palpable silence in the diner, the hum of conversations and clinking of dishes now, replaced with the weight of everyone's gaze fixed on Jake and Sophie. For a moment, the entire room seemed suspended in time, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next chapter in this unexpected encounter. Sophie stood there, still holding Jake, her mind racing. The tension that had gripped her all morning, the frustration and weariness of dealing with the rude customer, had melted away the instant she felt Jake's strong arms around her. It was as if the world outside the diner no longer mattered. Everything felt right again, just for this moment. But Jake's presence had not only changed the atmosphere in the room, it had changed Sophie too. She felt more grounded, more confident. It wasn't just that the businessman had apologized. It was the way Jake had handled it. The calm authority in his voice, the way he had stood up for her. Something Sophie had not realized she needed so badly until now. As the applause from the other customers died down, Jake gently pulled back, his eyes searching hers. "You okay?" His voice was warm, but there was a hint of concern in it too. He had always been there for her, even from afar, but there was something about his return today that felt different. Maybe it was the fact that they had fought so long to keep their family together, despite the distance, despite the struggles. Now, with him back home, Sophie felt like they could conquer anything. Sophie wiped away the tears that had begun to form in her eyes. She was overwhelmed, but it wasn't just the relief of seeing Jake again. It was the realization that, no matter how difficult things had been, she was stronger than she had given herself credit for. "Yeah, I'm okay now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. From across the room, Joe, the retired veteran who had come to her defense, gave a knowing nod and lifted his coffee cup in a silent salute to Jake. The rest of the diners murmured in agreement, their faces filled with admiration. Joe's voice, when it came, was a low rumble, but it carried weight. "It's good to see a man like you back home, Sergeant. This world needs more folks like you." Jake smiled at Joe, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "Thanks, Joe. It's good to be back." He turned back to Sophie, his eyes softening as he gently cupped her face. "I missed you." Sophie's heart skipped a beat as she looked up at him, the man she had spent so many months longing for. They had communicated through letters, video calls, and late-night texts, but nothing compared to having him here, in front of her. She let out a shaky breath, a mixture of relief and joy filling her. "I missed you too, so much." Before she could say another word, a small voice rang out from behind them. "Daddy!" Sophie turned just in time to see Lily, their 7-year-old daughter, rush toward Jake from the back of the diner. Lily's face was beaming with excitement, her small legs carrying her as fast as they could to the man who had been away for so long. Sophie watched with a smile as Jake knelt down, his arms opening wide to scoop their daughter up into his embrace. Lily giggled as Jake lifted her off the ground and hugged her tightly. "Hey, princess," he said, his voice full of affection. "I missed you so much." Sophie felt a lump form in her throat as she watched the scene unfold. It wasn't just a reunion. It was a reminder of why they fought so hard to stay strong. For each other, for their family. The diner, once filled with tension and discomfort, now buzzed with warmth. Customers who had been silent observers were now smiling, exchanging knowing glances as the heartfelt moment unfolded before them. Some even wiped away a tear or two. It was a small, ordinary moment, but it was filled with so much meaning. As Jake stood holding Lily in his arms, he turned to Sophie, his expression soft but confident. "Everything's going to be okay now. We're together again." Sophie nodded, unable to find the right words. But she didn't need to say anything. She could feel it in the way Jake held her, in the way their daughter nestled against his chest. They were a family again, and nothing else mattered. Outside, the businessman sat in his car, the engine running but his hands on the wheel frozen. He had come into the diner thinking he was the most important person in the room, but now, sitting there, he realized just how wrong he had been. Maybe, just maybe, he had learned something today. Inside, Sophie looked up at Jake, a quiet smile on her lips. It was a smile of relief, of joy, but also of something deeper, strength. And as the morning rush continued around them, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. As the moments passed, Sophie felt a sense of calm slowly settling over her. She was no longer just the waitress at the diner. She was Jake's wife again, the mother of their daughter, and for the first time in months, she felt like they could handle whatever life threw their way. But just as the relief of the reunion began to wash over her, something unexpected happened. The door to the diner swung open again. Sophie's heart skipped a beat as she turned, her smile faltering. She couldn't have imagined that someone else would walk in now. But there he was, Greg Turner, the businessman, standing at the door. His face was a shade of crimson, his body stiff with discomfort. He looked like he wanted to disappear, but his pride wouldn't let him. The diner's warmth seemed to vanish in an instant. The moment Jake had reclaimed his family and brought them back together, Greg's re-entry threatened to sour everything. Sophie felt her stomach twist, unsure of what would come next. Jake, still holding Lily in his arms, turned to face the businessman. His demeanor had shifted, the calm authority he'd carried earlier now replaced with a steely gaze. Sophie could feel the shift in the room, the tension creeping back in like a cold draft. Greg didn't say anything at first. His gaze flicked between Jake and Sophie, and the hesitation in his eyes was evident. He had been caught in the moment, the one where his pride had made him act foolishly. But now, standing before Jake, his earlier bravado seemed to shrink. He shuffled his feet, unsure of how to handle this situation, especially now that Jake was back. Finally, Greg cleared his throat and took a hesitant step forward. His voice, when it came, was strained, lacking the force it had carried earlier. I just wanted to apologize," he muttered, looking anywhere but at Sophie. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. It was out of line." Sophie's heart pounded in her chest. It wasn't the apology she had been expecting, but it was one nonetheless. She tried to keep her composure, to take the high road, but a part of her couldn't let go of the anger that had been building since the moment Greg had walked in. She had been disrespected, humiliated in front of everyone, and now this half-hearted apology didn't feel like enough. Jake, however, wasn't looking for any part of Greg's apology. His eyes were fixed on him, unwavering, his voice low but commanding. "Apologize to her," Jake said, his tone so firm it left no room for debate. "Not to me, to her." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Sophie watched, her pulse racing as Greg hesitated. It seemed like an eternity, the air thick with the weight of what needed to be done. The apology wasn't just a formality. It was about dignity, respect, and acknowledging that Sophie was a person worth recognizing, worth treating with decency. Greg shifted on his feet, his face reddening further. He looked over at Sophie, his mouth opening and closing as if trying to find the right words. But it wasn't until the silence between them became too much to bear that he finally spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible, filled with embarrassment. "I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. It was wrong." His eyes were now fixed on the floor, and for a moment, Sophie wasn't sure if he was truly apologizing or simply trying to escape the uncomfortable situation. Sophie took a deep breath, holding her composure. She nodded once, acknowledging the apology, though it felt like it came too late to undo the damage. "Thank you," she said quietly. I hope you understand why what you did was wrong." Greg looked up at her, and for the first time since entering the diner, he seemed to really see her, not as a waitress, but as a person. There was something in his eyes now, a flicker of realization, of shame. He didn't respond to her directly. Instead, he muttered something under his breath before quickly turning and walking toward the door. He threw a wad of cash on the counter, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet diner as he rushed out. Sophie exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, and she felt the tension begin to fade. The world around her was quieter now, the storm that had raged in her chest subsiding. She didn't need Greg's apology to feel better, but it was the fact that Jake had stood by her, that he had made sure she was treated with the respect she deserved, that mattered the most. As the door closed behind Greg, the diner erupted in applause once again. This time, the sound wasn't forced or awkward, it was genuine. People were clapping for what they had witnessed, not just the apology, but the strength that Sophie and Jake had shown in the face of adversity. Sophie's eyes met Jake's, and she saw the pride in them, the love that had been there all along. He stepped forward, placing his arm around her waist and pulling her close. "You okay?" he asked again, his voice soft. Sophie smiled, her heart full. "Yeah, I'm more than okay." As the crowd slowly returned to their meals, Sophie felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The drama had passed, but something had shifted inside of her. She was stronger now, more confident than before. And as she stood there, holding Jake's hand, she realized that no matter what came next, they would face it together. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's story. Sophie and Jake's journey is one of resilience, respect, and family strength. But what about you? Have you ever experienced a moment where standing up for yourself made all the difference? Or perhaps you've witnessed someone else in a similar situation, where the power of respect and support turned things around. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. What did you think of Jake's return and how he stood by Sophie in her moment of need? Do you think it's important to stand up for others, even when it's uncomfortable? We're excited to hear your opinions, personal experiences, and any thoughts you have on the themes of family, respect, and redemption in the story. And don't forget, your comment helps this community grow. By sharing your perspective, you inspire others to join the conversation. So go ahead, leave a thoughtful comment, and let us know what you think. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and be sure to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. We'll have something special for you tomorrow, so stay tuned.